But first I want to talk to Tom Hamilton, former head of research for the Labour Party, who's a co-author of the book Punch and Judy Politics, an insider's guide to PMQs. Now, Tim used to help Ed Miliband, Harriet Harman and briefly Jeremy Corbyn to prepare for PMQs during their tenures as Labour leader or acting leader. Tom, you've seen some scenes in the House of Commons in your time, particularly at PMQs, but I've never seen anything like today's events, and particularly which culminated in Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader in Westminster, saying that the Speaker's position was untenable. Now, there were lots of people against John Bercow, but I can't remember on the floor of the House of Commons anyone going that far.
No, that's absolutely right. And, it was chaotic and, clearly it's all been a bit of a mess. And the House of Commons as a whole hasn't covered itself in glory. I think one of the things that's really interesting about today is you're absolutely right that the House of Commons does see rowdy scenes from time to time. And obviously I used to work on PMQs, which is probably the rowdiest thing that you get in the House of Commons. But when it gets rowdy, it's nearly always getting rowdy over issues of sort of party political contention. They're insulting each other. They're having a go at each other on issues of national policy. It's actually really unusual to have scenes like this on a foreign policy issue where actually there's quite a lot of consensus across the House of Commons, and actually the differences are quite subtle. They're not that they're real, but they are quite subtle. And what that reveals is that I think that's what shows the House of Commons in such a bad light today, because the arguments today are all about parliamentary procedure and who got one up on the other in terms of who got things voted on, and were people treated slightly unfairly, and none of it, absolutely none of that argument and that anger was about the substance of the crisis that's going on in Gaza and the fact that, hundreds of people were taken hostage. There's a war going on. There's a lot of civilians dying. The things that we should be upset about, and not the things that the MPs seem to be upset about right now. And I think that's what leaves a nasty taste in the mouth.
But isn't that pure and simply the fault of Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, because he made that decision against the advice of his clerks and has now lived to regret it? He's now apologised for it.
Well, I don't want to go too far down the line of defending Lindsay Hoyle, not least because I think you heard in the clip that you played earlier, or the live piece that you played earlier, just he himself is clearly quite apologetic. I think he now regrets what happened and thinks that he probably made a mistake. I think the one thing that I say in his defence is that on an issue like this, one of the concerns that he's got to keep in mind is about the safety of MPs and the issue of a ceasefire. I think one of the things that Labour was very worried about was that on the one hand, there was a motion being put forward that it couldn't quite support because it didn't follow the policy that it wanted that it wants to put forward on Gaza around a ceasefire. Doesn't quite follow that. But on the other hand, they didn't want to put their MPs in a position where they could say, where it could be said of them that they voted against a ceasefire, because that would be a slightly oversimplistic reading, but it would be sort of true in strict terms. And I think what Lindsay Hoyle was trying to do, in a world in which, two MPs have been murdered in the last few years, in which lots of MPs have received death threats, in which there are some quite unpleasant things going on, is to try and make sure that MPs on all sides, although I think, to be fair, it probably was Labour MPs who were most concerned on this occasion, were not put in a position where they were subject to those sorts of threats. Now, I'm not saying that he handled it very well, but I think that motivation, I think that's what MPs on the Labour side in particular were most worried about.
What about these rumours that Keir Starmer had a meeting with Lindsay Hoyle earlier, and either he or somebody senior in the Labour Party threatened that if he didn't take this decision to allow the Labour amendment, then they would make sure that he wasn't Speaker in a future Labour government? I mean, it all sounds a bit House of Cardsy, doesn't it? But,
well, it does. I was just going to say, those are two sort of separate claims. The claim that he met Keir Starmer, maybe he did. He will meet senior MPs on all sides a lot, so that isn't in itself all that interesting. Was a threat made by the Labour Party? Well, all I know about that is that the Labour Party has come out and denied it, but I completely accept that that's what some perfectly reputable journalists reported, but the Labour Party is denying that. So I don't have any inside information on that. Clearly, MPs on all sides are quite dissatisfied by what happened, and Stephen Flynn was saying earlier that he wasn't sure that he had confidence in the Speaker anymore.
Okay.